Welcome to Scaling Without Breaking podcast, the show for startup leaders who are done winging it and sick of everything being a bottleneck. Your team's growing, the cracks are showing, and what got you here is officially breaking. Each week, you'll hear raw stories, sharp strategies, and real talk from founders, operators, and advisors who've scaled through chaos and built companies that run without constant firefighting. If you're ready to start leading like a CEO and move beyond just surviving, you're in the right place. Here is your host, Roland Siebelink.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Scaling Without Breaking. My next guest today is an experienced executive with over 20 years transforming companies internationally. She's the Chief People and Culture Officer at Vyntra, and that's a joint entity bringing together complementary fintech capabilities, transaction observability from Belgium, and fraud detection analytics from Switzerland, two countries that are very dear to me as well. Now, their clients include major banks like Bank of America, Clearstream, Nordea. What makes her story particularly compelling is how she's building culture and driving results through storytelling, making typically boring business processes actually engaging for teams across 5 different locations. I definitely want to hear more about that. She previously scaled Scandit, famous unicorn from Switzerland, from 70 to 600 employees, achieving 10x ARR growth. And she calls herself a professional foreigner who consistently chooses challenge over compensation. With that, everybody meet my guest, Gerlinde Boback. Welcome to Scaling Without Breaking, Gerlinde.
Hello, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, it's so exciting. We worked together very intensively when we were both helping to scale Scandit. So it's always great to have one of our strong connections back on the podcast. And Gerlinde, as I said in the intro, I'm most interested in how do you make boring OKRs engaging at a company?
I like the idea of OKRs. I've always liked the idea of OKRs. Old management by objectives got really boring over time, right? So it became a thing that we did in HR just because it's been something that we've been doing for 50 years. And that is always something that puts me off. So to me, a business process has to make sense to enable success and to enable performance in a company. And OKRs do that. If you read that original John Doerr book, Measure What Matters, and you start with the metrics that you want to influence, the needle that you want to move, then you've got a really compelling goal. It's not just an administrative list of things that need to get done, but it's a rock that we're moving forward. And now here at Vyntra, we of course have OKRs as well. Every tech company has OKRs. The cool thing that we're doing here is in the way how we communicate around the OKRs. Of course, we have a spreadsheet, of course, we have metrics, but what we actually talk about is what the people behind delivering the OKRs actually do to get there. So we put them on in our monthly town halls and ask them to tell us the story. So, the midnight rush to bring bank in Vietnam across the line and solve a business problem, and all these little stories that tell you how someone's ingenuity and determination made the day for that particular client and moved the needle a little bit further on that particular OKR. I think those are the stories that make people want to learn more about this, because this is their daily life. This is what they work with and their colleagues, right? So it's not ELT up there doing something. It's us all together working on shifting that rock a little further.
I love that. It's really good to get people to make the stories much more concrete and tangible, right? So that people can really live that. How do you actually do that? Because most of the people at Vyntra are not professional storytellers. Do you do interviews? Do you prep people? How do you actually get that story out?
Yeah, it's still a ways to go. So started off initially when I came to Vyntra, I went around and asked people for stories. Your favorite moment, what happened? What did you do? And I wrote those stories down and then played them back. And we've got a little bit of a storybook, which is the basis for our culture work. But now for those ongoing stories, we go through the OKRs on a monthly basis, and then we pick out the 2 or 3 things that we want the story told about. The instruction to the people telling the story is no slides. You're going to be spotlighted. It's just your talking head. There will be people asking questions, and very much like we do here, you just tell us what happened. And you can see people get excited. Not everybody is Steve Jobs, right? But by and large, people are telling pretty good stories. So, if you take the PowerPoint away, it tends to happen.
So it's really about authenticity and just telling exactly what happened in your own words, not make it that artificial and prepped, right?
Correct.
Give us another example of a good story that really landed with the Vyntra team.
Oh, which story should we tell? So, one story that I particularly like myself, being a psychologist and everything, one of our product managers, and he's a super creative guy, very intuitive, very visionary, and big picture driven, working with an engineer who was very detailed and very numbers driven and very structured. They tended to clash. And then
Mhm.
one day, the product manager went and said, tell me what's going on, right? So what's happening in your mind when I interrupt you? And they talked about what was happening in their interaction. And they agreed to, when the engineer's cup overflowed, to just take a break. All right, we'll find a different time to talk. And I thought that was a really sensitive way of dealing with a very different style in the organization to get to a common outcome, right? So, a respectful way of dealing with each other. So, that's one of the stories that we're sharing in our culture work as well.
I guess just the very fact of asking people to tell their side of a story also teaches people all the time that their perspective may not be somebody else's perspective. Their reality may be different from somebody else's reality, which I find is so often the key to understanding how to compromise, how to align people, understanding that you're not necessarily coming to the point from the same angle.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's probably also something that you're always aware of, but not many people with different backgrounds are necessarily trained in.
Yeah, I think that does help. And also, as you said earlier, the professional foreigner piece, right? If you travel the world, as you have experienced as well, you've lived in many different countries, right? You tend to challenge your own assumptions very directly because you do things in a certain way. You immediately find out that's not how it works here. Those funny moments, I think they train us to be more flexible in our thinking and to be more open minded and say, there are 10 different ways of approaching the situation.
Mm-hmm.
What's yours? And how can we come to a common one?
I remember somebody, I think it was my thesis advisor, who became the rector of the university, the chancellor of the university later on. And she already told me when I was in my 20s, like, hey, for every language you speak, for every country you live in, you become a different person, right? And you're pointing to being able to mix all these cultures gives you so much more flexibility and different ways of approaching problems than people who've always lived in the same culture would be able to do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So what does being a professional foreigner mean to you, Gerlinde, and what does it mean for leadership?
To me, that's always who I've been. My parents moved around a lot, so they're professional foreigners themselves as well. From a very early age, I changed schools a lot. I had to adapt a lot. One of my favorite stories is, back in the 80s, my family moved to the South in the US,
Mm.
Georgia. And my dad had previously lived in Africa, and Nigeria, and Kenya, various different places. He picked us a beautiful house in a 100% black neighborhood. It didn't even occur to him.
Wow.
For my school friends, that was a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
So in school, the school was exclusively white for
Yeah.
some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a really interesting experience for a young girl to walk on the edge between those two neighborhoods and not quite understand why I was being an outcast from both sides.
Exactly.
That was an interesting experience. And I think that stuff shapes the way you approach other people going forward, right? So I was always trying to adapt. It made me a bit of a people pleaser for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I had to learn through coaching and development. This idea of seeking to understand and being that puzzle piece that fits into this team,
Mm-hmm.
having that desire to fit into that team, I think that has really shaped my leadership style. And is probably why I landed in HR rather than finance or sales. I think,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that was definitely a part of my education.
In your experience, what makes for a great HR leader in a tech company in particular?
I see HR very much as a social science.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an administrative job, although you have to do some administration, but it's mostly finding out what works for this company to create a high performance environment.
Hmm.
There are no standard recipes. Obviously there's a lot of received wisdom that you can build on. And I think especially in a tech company, in a growing tech company, you have to be really smart about where you invest your valuable time in building new things and new solutions, and where you just go the straight route and get something off the shelf. Everything you do has to make a difference. I used to work for big American companies, American Express, 100,000 employees. There's a process, you follow the process. So your individual contribution doesn't make such a big difference. Whereas in a tech company, especially in a small startup or scale up environment, having the right people at the right place with the right engagement, knowing what they're doing, being enabled, being engaged, that makes a real difference, and it makes a measurable difference on the bottom line. So, especially in an HR role in tech, you are a business leader, and
Hmm.
you have to have that commercial mindset to connect how the work you're doing in HR impacts the bottom line.
Must be also sometimes challenging to be getting the founder to buy into the things that you're seeing as really important. Most founders are not really well schooled or trained or even experienced with HR. And I also find many founders really fear making the company too bureaucratic too early. How have you dealt with those challenges in Scandid, in Vyntra, and other companies that you've worked at?
hmm I find that founders are intensely interested in what you're doing. So
Hmm.
I've always interpreted for some people, that's micromanagement to really have to explain exactly what you're doing and why. And I've always experienced that as, I just really want to know how this works. Why do you
Hmm.
that bonus program will drive performance, right? Or why do you think that, having conversations around what worked and what didn't work will increase performance? So those conversations have always been super in depth, a lot more intense than in the listed companies. They just accept what you say at face
Hmm.
value. A very different experience. As long as you don't say complete nonsense, they tend to accept what you say.
Right.
Whereas in whereas in a scale-up world with founders, you have to actually be prepared to communicate why you think this will work.
Hmm.
And in particular, in situations where you have different professions arguing around the same thing. So, for example, when we went through re-engineering rounds, particularly in Scandit, right? My approach is always do what you can to make sure that the person feels like a full human being, like a respected person when
Hmm.
they the company. They walk out with their head held high. It's just business. There's no hard feelings, then absolutely have to be, right? So
Right.
of course it's not a pleasant process, but nobody feels like they're suddenly mistrusted, right? And I think that is a very delicate balance to achieve.
Hmm.
Whereas if you talk to the lawyers will say, well, of course, you switch off the systems as soon as you hand over the letter and you close the door behind them, take everything away, you put all the belts and braces in the contract. And yes, that all also has a place, but it has a place when you have a real reason to think that someone will turn against you, right?
You're right.
People as human beings, 99.9% of the time, people will not turn against the company because
Hmm.
they're still connected. They still have friends there. They still have an interest in making that company they used to work for look good. And I think that's where it's really hard to come to a conclusion with a founder who really wants to understand the risk balance. And the emotional balance is extremely hard to quantify. You can't say this will not happen because it might.
In my experience, when working with scaling companies, everyone has to go through one, two, maybe three reduction in force rounds at some point in time. It's less about it might happen and it's probably going to happen at some point in time. How do you coach founders through the very first time when they actually have to do a reduction in force?
Yeah, that was a very tough situation.
Hmm.
It was the situation that we went through initially at Scandit was a small round first, followed by a very big round.
Okay.
And the small round first, I think there was a sense of, okay, we can manage this. And then they kind of saw how we orchestrated a reduction force from an HR perspective. So
Mm-hmm.
in those situations, I'm insanely project management driven. So I'll have a
Right.
project plan that has everything listed, and we go through that project plan on a regular basis, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone's aligned and they know what they do, and we check in if it's done. The managers get templates exactly what to say. So it's very
Right.
scripted to make sure we're all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Of course, the person leaving doesn't see that project management. They hopefully get a really good conversation that allows them to walk away with their head held high. And I think because that worked well, the founders then said, okay, I guess we can, this is doable. It's painful, but it doesn't break everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. It's something that they have to go through once to realize that this is part of a competence in a way that they have to build up. And as I mentioned before, I don't think that it's something that they can avoid if they want to be a leader at a company. It's going to happen at some point in time.
It will,
What
inevitably.
are what are like the biggest horror moments you've seen at other companies that are just the worst practices possible?
Yeah. I think the purely legal driven. So if there isn't that healthy balance between human and legal, I think
Hmm.
that usually ends up bad because people feel really, I can't think of the English word, but it feels like a slap in the face. Uh,
Right, exactly. Like after all the family building that you did before, and then suddenly it's a pure legal and cold approach, right?
that turning off the systems, we don't talk to you anymore. There are human relationships there. Unfortunately, you see that a lot where you just get terminated, your email access is terminated, nobody
Hmm.
knows where to find you anymore, and you're gone, right? So that's a big mistake because one of the things that we took away from Scandit is we've now got a really strong and vibrant alumni network.
So, how do you feel about managing an alumni network? And is that actually part of the HR job?
Yes, I think it is. We didn't have time while I was still sort of in full role at
Sure.
Scandit. As soon as I left, I invited all the people who had left in the last couple of years, and we had over 100 signups within 24 hours. It was people were just actually happy to join again, which was amazing,
Hmm.
you know? And we still exchange messages. People still talk to each other. Not everyone, of course, not everybody's going to feel the same. But yeah, there's a group of people that still go out for Christmas drinks and.
Amazing, amazing. Do you feel that that's something that's different for like the scale up companies out there versus the larger publicly listed companies that you mentioned? Is there something special about joining one of those scale up companies as an employee?
Oh, there's a lot of special things in scale-out companies. So somebody recently asked me if I ever thought of going back to, say an American Express or any of those big companies. And while I absolutely loved being there, I would never go back. It's just a very, very different environment. You matter differently in a scale-up company.
What makes it so different?
You're part of building something different. You're part of changing the world in a small way. And that is something that you couldn't pay me enough to go away from this environment. So you said earlier, work for purpose, not pay. That is true. I'm not complaining about my pay.
So this must be related, right?
Yes, I think a lot of people who work in scale-up companies do.
Mm-hmm.
See, if you talk to the engineers, seeing your fingerprints on the code, knowing that that piece of code that you wrote is protecting people from being scammed online, right? So
Right.
that knowledge is extremely powerful. And you don't get that if you work for Visa or MasterCard, right?
So that also means like the kind of people you recruit are probably quite different between a scale up and a large public company. What would you say are the differences in the kind of people you target, but also maybe the process around it?
Yeah. They are typically purpose driven people. So
Yeah.
they all have an itch to scratch in the world. And you can see it when we have our lunch and learn sessions here. And, there's a lot of people who do sort of personal engagement research on what's happening in the world of fraud or what's happening in the world of banking and how can we make that system more transparent and more user friendly for everyone. It is their personal passion that you can see through.
Hmm.
And while you always in a big company, you always ask whether, why are you choosing American Express? You expect to hear something around values and heritage and, brand, whatever. it just has a different quality. Here it's really, this is my personal passion. I've always been interested in fraud, right? So that's something that has always moved me, and that's why I'm here. And you can see that relationship. And the sort of, there's always a shadow side to every coin, right?
Of course.
That this also means that a lot of the people are not your 9 to 5 types.
Right.
So you tend to have work-life balance challenges, and you tend to see more burnout in our environment, and you tend to see more people really going to the extremes of, especially if they're solving a really tricky problem, right? They don't stop. So you see more tears in a scale-up company,
Mm.
which also means you need a different kind of HR.
Gerlinde, you mentioned that when you worked on values, the engineers in the company chose kindness as the first value. That's maybe a little bit unexpected against prejudice. So what happened there?
So the way we designed our values, and I have to say that we call them baby values at this stage. So they were
Baby values.
baby
Tell
values.
us, what does that mean, baby values?
We're designing the company values with everyone. There are a number of workshops that we're running, and every workshop brings forth one baby value. So it's born out of that group. Then, of course, it has to mature as it is discussed with other groups, right? So it'll grow up over time. But at this stage, we've got kindness as one of our baby values. And the way we do this is I ask them to think about situations where things have just worked really well and what happened
Mhm.
there. What qualities did they see when things were working really, really well?
Or the pockets of excellence, as one of the authors called it, I believe, right?
Exactly, yes.
Hmm.
But in very concrete, specific examples. In this group of engineers, what they were talking about was that they were working together across borders with different countries. It was about just being really clear about their boundaries, what they can deliver, how much they can sign up for. Then they defined kindness as letting each other know where I am and what I can do and what I can contribute and how to
Hmm.
help you, but also where my helping stops. Just being clear, and you can almost, it's kind of that radical transparency kindness that they define, but the word came from them. It was their word of kindness.
Okay, so kindness as in clarity, as in candor, as in being both helpful, but also showing your boundaries in a way.
Yeah. Being honest to
That
each. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. That's a really good description. I love it. So one thing that is specific about working at tech companies is that even the non-technical people often have a passion for technology. And I think in the prep call, you mentioned something around building a job description wizard with Claude in 90 minutes. Can you walk us through that?
Yes, surely. I'm quite fascinated by what AI can do. Obviously has its pitfalls, and I was talking to a chief information security officer the other day, and we were talking about how we can use AI in the company to enable better working. And he said something about our generation, we can be trusted with AI. And I thought that was really interesting why he would say that. And his perspective was that, we don't take what AI says at face value.
Right.
So we would treat AI like a junior team member and say, that's a great first draft. Let me read that. Let me correct
Exactly.
it, throw it back.
The iteration, right?
Exactly. And that's exactly how I work with Claude, right? So I treat it like a junior team member. I tell it what I want to do, I give it context. And then when it has the context and it has the information, it'll produce something. And then I'll say, hey, Claude, that looks good. I think that's made up. Can you figure that one out again? And
Mhm.
let's iterate.
You are
Very
so right.
One day, I was working with Claude relatively late at night, and for some reason, I said, "Thanks, Claude. That was great work." And Claude came back with, "Oh, it's such a pleasure working with you. You're such a great leader."
Exactly like a great junior employee would have to do to make you feel good, right? So I made the mistake of putting something in the system prompt like be brutally honest with me, do not just share empty compliments. And I've never had such bitchy answers as since I put that in the system prompt. So now I think I have to tone it down again because it's starting to make me feel bad.
Oh, no, try
You're building like a job description wizard that then basically other people can apply to just write a job description very quickly and get through that arduous task in no time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the job description wizard is one that is up and running. It's actually quite interesting because there are billions of job descriptions already out there. I asked Claude to do. And what that prompt does is it goes and looks at the key differences for similar job titles and then says, is your job more this direction or that direction?
So it's really forcing the decision almost.
Exactly. And so it comes up with really good quality job descriptions that way. So, but in the meantime, I've got a policy wizard, I have an internal communications wizard, I've got a LinkedIn post wizard. So I've got a number of agents running for me at this point.
All available to people inside Vyntra.
We're still working on the Vyntra AI policy, so that one's still work in progress.
Okay. Well, if there's anything that you can share publicly, we're happy to put it in the show notes afterwards, of course, that people could try out those prompts a little bit. The other topic I wanted to bring up, Gerlinde, is you also volunteer quite a bit, right? And I think you mentioned coaching unhoused people in job searches through Radical Recruit. Tell us more about that. And what has that taught you about resilience?
Yeah, I've met some amazing people in that process.
Mm-hmm.
Radical Recruit is a headhunter agency, you might say, that is specialized in finding jobs for unhoused people, the UK particularly. And they are very proud to have placed a large number of people into very good jobs and help them find housing and come back into where they used to be. People
Mm-hmm.
unhoused for a crazy number of situations that
Yeah.
shouldn't. Here we are, they happen. I've met some really interesting people. I've met refugees. I've met teenagers who've run away from home. I've met
No.
battered wives. It's a long list of reasons why people end up on the streets. And they have an insane amount of skills, right? They've survived, they've confronted hardships, and they're just beautiful, amazing people.
Does that mean that in a way they have a skill set that is not something to be expected from just the average recruit?
I think they have different skills. They definitely have confronted situations that, the average applicant will not.
Mm-hmm.
They've picked themselves up and they're back and presenting themselves as your personal assistant or your travel agent.
So I'm guessing the jobs where you place somebody really successfully has to do with jobs where you have to be resilient, right? Where, that resilience is actually a core factor.
Yeah. A number of the people I spoke to, they went into sort of social services as well, supporting other people through different difficult situations.
Okay, that's excellent. Yeah, it's been like a friend of mine was a social worker, and in the end, he got recruited directly into a supervisor position because he could show like he's no longer idealistic, he's realistic and resilient. And that's what they need most in those jobs, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Very good. So I wanted to go a little bit into the person behind the executive, if that's okay for you, Gerlinde, in the last 10 minutes or so. So you already mentioned that you were a child of a migrating family, right? Like a nomad family almost. But tell us where you grew up and like what were the key areas where you have fond memories?
My heart still is in Austria. I was born in Austria and a lot of my family lived there. So at heart, I'm Austrian. And even within Austria, I've moved around a lot. But, those places won't mean a lot to people outside of
Is there
Austria.
more smaller places maybe?
Up until I was married, I never spent more than 3 years in the same place.
I see.
My parents moved to the US in the 80s. Another experience I had that is kind of unusual is I then went back as a teenager and lived in Austria boarding school, formally adopted by my dad's brother. So I've got a selected dad as well as a real dad. I spent the holidays in the US, went back and forth, and I was very young to be very independent in that sense.
Okay, you were the kid basically flying back and forth with the big unaccompanied minor thing around your neck, or?
Didn't have that back then.
Well, you still survived. That's very good. When did you first find out that you have a gift of helping others figure things out, coaching in a way?
Basically from grade school. My
Uh-huh.
mom was a kindergarten teacher, and she used to drag me to disadvantaged kids' homes to play with them so that they would have somebody to hang out with and a friend when they went to school ultimately. And so I was always hanging around with the kids who were not in the mainstream. I remember walking home with one of them one day and saying, you know what, we'll do some exercises together. That was maybe first, second grade, where I was sort of picking up tutoring.
Better. So yes, it's really like something that you had learned very early on in life, or maybe that was baked in almost, right?
It was baked in. It was definitely baked in. It was the desired behavior that my mom instilled in me, and I enjoyed it.
What in particular did your mom do, you think, other than just having you play with people in those situations? that made you become so helpful to folks?
She was helpful, and I think spans generations. I remember my grandmother, who was a big role model for me. In her late 80s, she lived up on the hillside, and she would cycle down the hill into the town to help the old folks. She wasn't old enough, you know? So, yeah. So I think it's a family value.
Right. And you mentioned, I think your motto is no complaints, just solutions. Is that also something that your mom or your grandma taught you, or did you have to learn it for yourself?
No, I think that was also in that maternal family line that we don't complain, we just get on with it and make it better.
Okay, that's amazing. And thinking back a little bit, like in what you said, grade school, grade one, grade two, right? Like, who's the first person who really needed your help? Not wanted help, but just needed it.
I'm thinking of my grade school years. I was in a very small village in the
Hmm.
1970s. If I want to paint the picture for you, it was a lot of farms, very a lot
Yeah.
of not sustainable. What do you call that?
I'm imagining you like Heidi now,
Kind of.
not in the mountains, maybe.
Lots of little small family farms. And
Mhm.
back in the day, you had one bath a week. So if you were living in a normal mainstream household, that was okay. If
Mhm.
you were getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to muck out the pigsty, that was not okay. And I remember one friend of mine who I used to walk home from school with. He was much older than his classmates, much taller than his classmates. He had to get up in the morning and muck out the pigsty. He was not the popular person in that class for
Mhm.
various reasons, and he definitely needed a friend. We
Mhm.
used to come from school together. And I think I was using my popularity because my dad was all around the world and sent me exotic fruit and brought me exotic gifts. I was popular.
Yeah, you had something to offer, right?
Yeah. So in modern parlance, you would say I was an ally. I was there for him. I was his friend. He'd have somebody to talk to in break
Oh,
time.
that's so nice. Not just focusing on the other popular kids then, right? But looking at ones that really need your help in a way. Who do you think saw your potential before you did, Gerlinde?
I want to say one of my first bosses when I joined Compaq
Yeah.
in 1999, in the
Mm-hmm.
last millennium. I had no idea. I didn't even want to be in HR. I had no idea what HR even was. I was just interviewing him for a seminar, and he kept me around for a little longer, sent me down to meet the CEO. When I came out of the CEO's office, he had a contract for me. He was like, "You're coming to work for me." I was like, "Okay, fine." I think he really saw something in me that I had no idea was there.
Was that the moment, or was there a different moment when someone's belief in you changed everything for you?
I think that definitely changed my trajectory. At the time, I was still too young to know anything about imposter syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
doubt myself in any way. So, and he gave me the leeway to do some really big, important things in the
Mm-hmm.
company. So it was just after Compaq had acquired digital equipment,
Yeah.
and here I was, 24 years old, in charge of cultural integration, my first job ever in HR. And of course, he was there and he was coaching me and helping me in the background,
Right.
but I got all the glory, and that was a really good experience.
Looking back, Gerlinde, what would a little girl who was traveling the world think of who you've become?
I think she would be impressed that I am living in Switzerland
Mm-hmm.
because Switzerland is one up for Austrians, right?
Fair enough.
I don't think she would have ever thought that.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't the
And who do you think of all the people who influenced you, who mentored you, who guided you, educated you, who would be most proud of all the lives that you've changed?
my grandmother.
I love it, love it. Gerlinde, we are so happy to have had you on the podcast. This has been an amazing interview. I love how open you are and how you shared all your experience with our audience. If people want to hear more about the company or maybe want to get in touch with you, where do they go and how do they reach you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to meet new people on LinkedIn. I'm also on Blue Sky. That's a bit of a more of an obscure reference in Europe, I think. Under my name, Gerlinde Boback, and Vyntra.com is our website. So you can find out more about the amazing things we do to protect the world's financial systems from fraud and help make transactions more transparent.
That's amazing. And of course, people who know me and don't know Gerlinde yet, I'm happy to introduce you as well. Since you are responsible for the whole people function at Vyntra, are you looking for new employees? What are the typical people you are looking for to hire for Vyntra if the hiring is open at this stage?
Oh, yes, we are hiring a large number of people. We're
Mhm.
definitely looking for a lot of systems engineers. We're looking for support engineers, so people who can actually work with the customers on client side and help implement, run systems or run diagnostics or advise how we implement systems. So a lot of technical jobs are open. And I'm also looking for an office manager in Belgium and a payroll manager.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll also share this with my old network in Belgium from when I lived there. And who knows, we might find the best possible talent for Vyntra to join you soon.
I really enjoyed the conversation, Roland.
Thank you again, Gerlin. Thank you for being on the show.
Take care.
Yeah, this brings us to the end of another episode, and I will see you on the next one.
The Scaling Without Breaking podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.